Hello and welcome to the 7th Annual AAKP Global Summit on Kidney Disease Innovations, themed The Decade of the Kidney at Midpoint, Opportunities and Barriers to Greater Innovation and Freedom from Disease and Disability. This annual event is proudly hosted by the American Association of Kidney Patients in collaboration with our allied partners at George Washington School of Medicine and Health Sciences. My name is Juresic and I'm honored to serve as the AAKP International Ambassador from Australia, and I'm also a kidney transplant patient. I was diagnosed as a teenager with kidney issues caused by a severe case of HSP and vasculitis, which ultimately led to a kidney transplant when I was 25, 13 years ago. I work as a strategist across APAC based in Sydney for Uber, but also serve as the founder and CEO of Kidney Ally, a startup dedicated to helping patients self-manage chronic kidney disease. Being involved in AAKP allows me, as a patient, to be part of a global kidney community committed to improving the lives of kidney patients. It has empowered me to use my personal journey and professional skills to advocate for innovation, education, and patient-led solutions in kidney care. Since 2019, the Global Summit has served the global kidney community as the largest patient-led kidney disease innovation summit in the world. This year's Global Summit marks an important milestone because it is the midpoint of the AAKP-led Decade of the Kidney. This global initiative has been mirrored across the world by kidney advocates, medical allies, and government officials, and among people of goodwill committed to the return of the true patient-centered medicine. Throughout the first half of the Decade of the Kidney, we have raised awareness about the increasing burdens of kidney disease worldwide among people, communities, workforces, and governments. This effort has also accelerated a golden era of medicine and the determination to transcend the status quo in treatments, including brick-and-mortar dialysis, to a future kidney care that will be determined by expansions in patient consumer care choice, targeted therapies that stop kidney disease and prevent kidney failure, greater access to donated organs, new devices and alternatives to human organs, including an artificial wearable and implantable kidneys and xenotransplantation. We believe the time is now as we move through the next 5 years for patients, care partners, clinicians, researchers, innovators, industry, and government leaders to accelerate our bold actions to push forward modern diagnostics, devices, and therapeutics and continue to remove outdated policies that block their adoption. No country is immune to the impacts of kidney disease, but the good news is every person watching has a role in shaping a future for all people who are at risk or living with kidney disease and offer more hope, better outcomes, and greater independence and freedom from kidney disease and disability. With that, I am honored to serve as the moderator for our session titled Important Early Intervention Studies of Kidney Diseases. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, Dr. Biruh Workeneh. Dr. Workeneh is a professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine, Division of Internal Medicine at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, a nephrologist and an educator. Dr. Workeneh has led clinical trials, authored over 50 peer-reviewed publications, and held leadership roles in nephrology and inpatient dialysis. He is also deeply committed to global health, having helped establish a dialysis clinic in Addis Ababa and serving on several international health boards. His work reflects a lifelong dedication to advancing kidney care and expanding access for patients worldwide. Dr. Workeneh, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you to the AAKP and George Washington University. Today, I want to share something new, something that just a few years ago seemed unimaginable, the use of CAR T-cell therapy, not just in cancer, but in lupus. So today we'll be talking about contextualizing CAR T-cell therapy for lupus and lupus nephritis. What I will share will be centered on the patient's experience. So let's take a moment to talk honestly about the treatments we have today for lupus and lupus nephritis. So many of the standard therapies can take weeks to months to show effects, such as tried and true medications like prednisone, belimumab, mycophenolate, cyclophosphamide, rituximab, voclosporin, and there are others. But some of these medicines can take a few days, few weeks, and even months to be effective. And the truth is they don't work on everyone. So even with treatment, a substantial portion of patients fail to achieve complete remission. Patients with lupus nephritis can have progressive kidney damage. They can have joint damage that continues and is progressive. They can have scarring over their skin, their scalp, hair loss, which is devastating for patients. Patients with lupus have heart disease, either as a direct result of the lupus and the autoimmune disease, or as a result of the burden of lupus with the sedentary lifestyle, with also the medications and some of the side effects associated with these medications. Steroids remain a cornerstone of therapy for lupus, especially during flares, and often patients are maintained on a low dose of steroids, but they can be associated with a lot of problems that really affect patients. This includes weight gain, mood changes, high blood pressure. Patients can develop diabetes as a result of being on these medications for prolonged periods of time. And patients can also develop osteoporosis. In addition, patients can develop vision problems such as cataracts. Immunosuppressants, which is also frequently used in patients with lupus and lupus nephritis, can increase the risk of infections. Gastrointestinal side effects can occur with medications such as mycophenolate and others. With certain medications, there are infertility concerns, and there's hematologic toxicity, which is the fancy word meaning it affects bone marrow, and also there's theoretical risk. It raises the lifetime risk for malignancies or cancers. So from a patient's perspective, I really found these articles that I cited at the bottom very revealing. I think it's important for providers to understand. And the way I phrase these bullet points is I use personal pronouns just to for effect, but it's essentially a summary of how much of a psychic toll that lupus and living with lupus has on patients. So the first one, although medications help, I live in fear of the next flare. The side effects I feel are as bad as the disease. Despite treatment, lupus affects my daily living in my major life choices, such as my career, my marriage, whether or not I have children. And I wish for more tailored and effective treatments. So when we talk about innovation and CAR T-cell therapy, this is the gap we're trying to fill. That is the context with which there is so much hope and excitement about CAR T-cell therapy. So I've underlined early experience because it's just that. I'm one of the investigators of CAR T-cell therapy, and we're in the early phase. That just means that we're just understanding how safe it is to use in these patients. But it's okay to be excited. It's okay to have hope. And certainly, I believe that patients and family members, loved ones of those with lupus should be excited. But us as investigators, as physicians, we're all excited as well about this potential therapy for lupus. The protocols that exist are intensive for patients and providers. That means that this is not as simple as popping a pill. This therapy requires some period in the hospital where T cells are recruited and then expanded in the lab. So they require collaboration with other rheumatologists, other services. So you might, a typical protocol will have a rheumatologist, a nephrologist, a stem cell specialist, or a cellular therapy specialist. And so it's intensive in that way. And certainly we ask a lot of the patients who are in the protocols. There are significant risks involved with this therapy. And so that should not be minimized. And it's important, I believe, what the AAKP is doing to provide education and advocacy for new treatments for lupus. And I think, in our experience, that barrier to entry into studies can be lowered, especially if there's peer-to-peer education and support and advocacy. There are stringent inclusion and exclusion criteria, and that's led to some frustration. For example, there are 6 classes of lupus nephritis, and if they don't have a particular class, then perhaps they are not allowed to or meet the criteria for consideration in the study, and that can be frustrating. But the big picture is very important, which is the first step is to establish the safety and efficacy of this drug, and perhaps in the future, when this therapy is in the market, other classes of lupus and other various degrees of lupus, these patients can also be included. And so one of the things I wanted to share is this Goldilocks principle, where in this early embryonic phase of this therapy, it's important not to include too many patients who are very sick, where perhaps they will have bad outcomes. At the same time, we want to make sure that we see a difference in the therapy before and after treatment. And so patients who have more mild versions of lupus perhaps aren't the best at this stage of evaluation of this therapy. So I believe there's room for optimism, but that optimism should be measured, and we need to let the science work. So thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure spending this brief time sharing a little bit about my experience with this new and exciting therapy. So if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to hear from you.
Thank you, Dr. Workeneh. That was an excellent presentation. As a follow-up, I'd like to ask a few questions. Understanding that approximately 30 to 50% of individuals with lupus develop lupus nephritis, how and when can an individual be referred to a clinical trial studying CAR T-cell therapy?
That's a very good question. So I would recommend that every patient with lupus explore all their options, including clinical trials. So that was the first point I want to make, is that clinical trials can be a source of alternative therapies. But for CAR T cells, we want to select patients who've tried some standard therapies. So if they've tried standard therapies and their disease activity is still high, perhaps it's worked, but it hasn't worked as effectively as it should, then CAR T cell therapy study might be good for that individual. So refractory cases, also relapsing cases where the standard therapy perhaps works and patients respond, but the disease keeps coming back. And so in those instances, the CAR T cell therapy studies might be a good idea. And so I think in those instances where something has been tried and is not quite working, or patients are concerned about long-term toxicity, for example, of being on certain medicines that have side effects, like high-dose steroids and things like that, then at that point, those individuals should also avail themselves of a clinical trial with CAR T cell therapy.
And throughout the decade of the kidney, there has been an emphasis on early disease detection and diagnosis, and furthermore, the development of treatments that stop or slow the progression of kidney disease. Do you anticipate CAR T-cell therapy to become the first line treatment, or more individuals who do not respond to current lupus therapeutics?
I think that's an open question. I think anything's possible. And in the scientific method is wonderful because we don't lead with our conclusions. What we're leading is with cautious, careful investigation. And if we find that the therapy is effective and it's safe, then at that point you'll see CAR T cell therapy be a staple of treatment. I believe, it's my belief, that in the future that the CAR T cell therapies might be simplified and will be made safer. And that's the goal of this series of investigations that the FDA is overseeing. And so for now, I see it as a rescue or a therapy that I believe if the standard therapies isn't working for that individual, that patients could, if this is approved, avail themselves of the therapy. But as time goes on and the technology improves and we make it safer, perhaps it could be first line therapy. The promise of CAR T, or the excitement is because patients who've received these therapies and the initial reports, these patients are requiring less long-term therapy in terms of like the number of therapies and the intensity of therapies. And so that speaks to the long-term toxicity and lowering that burden of taking medicines and having flares. And so we're hoping that CAR T cell therapy results in what some of us call an immunological reset. And so perhaps in the future it could be a first line therapy, but I see it more as coming into the market as a second line therapy.
And finally, AAKP fights not only for early disease detection, but also appropriate diagnosis of kidney disease caused by genetic conditions or rare conditions such as lupus nephritis. As we move through the final 5 years of the decade of the kidney, in your opinion, can you share with us the importance of furthering science in these areas so innovation in targeted therapies can advance and help more people and families?
Wonderful question. I think first things first, it is what's been around for over 100 years, which is going to see your doctor, getting a checkup, making sure your blood pressure is controlled. That includes looking at your urine for any abnormal signs that of protein in the urine, for example, or other signs that your kidneys could be in trouble. And so there's so much to be done just on the basics of just access to care. As you know, lupus affects women of color disproportionately and underserved disproportionately. And so these are, I think, barriers. But beyond that, all of our advancements, especially now, in not just only nephrology or rheumatology, it's really science-based. And the idea is for customized, tailored therapies, precision medicine. And so I think identifying genetic diseases, for example, I know the AAKP promotes screening for potential genetic causes of kidney diseases. So we've learned a lot about APOL1, for example. We've known about Alports and some other genetic diseases, and there are multiple clinical trials addressing that. And so I think that's from the bench to the bedside approach, I think, is serving us well in medicine. So hopefully that continues.
Thank you, Dr. Workeneh. We are so thankful that you could be part of this session.